Elizabeth is back on the phone. Hi, Elizabeth.
I'm back. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on here.
It doesn't matter. We'll put the caption of the book up, and people will be able to listen to it. So the first of the gauntlet was Alger Hiss a communist spy?
Say it again.
Was Alger Hiss a communist spy?
I mean, they didn't really teach me about that in seminary, so I'm not sure that I can speak with authority on that.
You don't no idea, no lean one way or the other.
I mean, I try to stick with things that are more like Catholic medieval philosophy than I do spies.
All right, number two, The Looming Tower. Have you read it?
I have not read it.
All right, number three, tell me what you know about the Ottoman Empire.
The Ottoman Empire. Well, this is like what I. You're making my civ teacher from school probably be like, what did she do on that class? But I think it's like really impressive the way that so many preserved so much of the philosophy and the teaching over the years. Like actually, a lot of Western culture owes a lot about literature and philosophy and math and everything to a lot of preservation that they did.
They did. Many Muslims preserved the works of Aristotle and the ancient Greeks that we would have been lost in the West. Not sure what the list is, but you're right about that. But any idea about how big it was or how long it lasted?
It lasted a very long time, and it was pretty big.
Yeah, and
like hundreds of we're talking of like hundreds of years.
700
right?
years.
700,
And
yeah.
it was replaced by my penultimate question, the British Mandate. What was that?
The British Mandate. Hugh, I think you're probably embarrassing me here. I
No,
feel
no,
like
no. I don't want to embarrass you. It's
no,
the
no,
mandatory
it's
Palestine as the Brits took over from the
yeah, I was
Ottomans in
thinking,
the Middle East. And
but all
final
the way
question
in 47, in
in
53, 53, 47,
44, after
44.
the Middle East was taken care of and the war was gone, the Brits took over the Middle East. Of course, Ike was there with Operation Torch as well. But mandatory Palestine became their obligation from the fall of the British Empire, from the fall of the Ottoman Empire forward. So they were there in force from, I believe, 1918 forward, and they left in 1947 or 1948. And then finally, what notable thing? You are a religion reporter, so this one, I put an easy one. It's Jeopardy for 10. What notable thing did the Romans do in 70 AD?
In 70 AD, it was the fall of the temple.
That's it. The fall. So 1 out of 4, not bad. Now,
Oh, you're being very generous.
well, let's talk now about your book. We are not going to agree on much other than it's beautifully designed and laid out. I have one nagging question that I always ask authors because it makes it hard on interviewers. Why isn't there an index?
I think you're gonna have to ask the publisher that. I am hoping, I'm crossing my fingers. There's a discussion for an index in the next round. But part of it, when you're doing a topic that is so politically contemporarily relevant, it's a timing question. And I'm always sort of surprised in publishing. Journalism at the times you operate like everything is happening very quickly, very short turnarounds, and publishing with what I've been told with the printing and how all that works, they actually need an extra month in there, and we went to the printer in April, so we had a bit of a tight timeline. But I'm crossing my fingers because I also would appreciate an index.
Yeah, the reason it's good for an interview, I read the book in 3 days in order to prepare for
I'm
the interview. I
impressed.
got it on
I'm
pub date.
impressed.
And I didn't see some stuff, but it might be there. And if I missed it, just tell me I missed it
Yeah, of
because I
course.
try to be very fair with my authors. Now, I've been
Yeah.
teaching con law since 1996 to law students at Chapman's Law School, Fowler School of Law.
Yeah.
Whenever I teach these cases, the abortion cases, I emphasize at the beginning of those lectures, and it takes 3 days, that look to your left, look to your right. There's women on your left and your right. Some of those women may have been adopted through a crisis pregnancy center. Some of them may have been clients of a client pregnancy center. Some of them may be struggling with infertility, and some of them may have had an abortion or abortions. And that therefore civility is always necessary when the discussion of abortion comes around. Is that your approach to it as well?
It is. You know, Hugh, I've been covering religion and and abortion in the U.S. for, as you said, 15 years, and my approach really has been one of listening, and you can ask a lot of the sources. I'm sure you know many of them. We have had participation from hundreds of people in the pro-life, anti-abortion movement for this project and in my work over the years. And so I tend to think, my job as a reporter is to listen and to um, try to hear the essence of what people are sharing. This is a movement that I think has actually felt boxed out in many ways, by so much of the mainstream, political media, everything conversation. And you could ask them what they think of my work, but it's been very important to me to treat everyone with respect and to take their work seriously. It's been very important, work that changed American history, and especially with the Fall of Roe. I mean, this is, what they accomplished was something that they were underestimated, and no one really understood their work. And this is one of the biggest political resurgences, legal changes in the entire country's history. And as with any movement, something like that deserves to be taken seriously and understood for this really important historical contribution to the country. Plus, there's just a really human element to it. I mean, I've spent hours and hours in pregnancy centers, with the women run. Mostly, it's women running them. Although there are some men's programs, especially in recent years, that are taking off, and with the clients, the women who come in. And I think until you really are deep in there, it's easy to kind of stereotype what all that is about. And I've just really learned a lot being in those spaces.
Now, Elizabeth, throughout the book, you and Lisa referred to the anti abortion movement. It has long been my practice in public life and in private life to refer to people as they choose to be referred. So I talk about the pro reproductive rights movement, not the pro abortion movement. I talk about the pro life movement, not the anti abortion movement. Throughout the Fall of Roe, and by the way, Frank Luntz always says you got to say the title of the book 7 times or people won't remember the title of the Fall of Roe. So say the Fall of Roe often. What we did in the Fall of Roe was blah, blah, blah. But why did you consciously choose to use the term anti abortion as opposed to pro life throughout the book?
Yeah, I remember actually when this shifted. It was a big change in media. I think it was about 10 years ago, because I was writing before then, and I did refer to the pro life movement, but the AP style guide switched it, and everyone. I mean, there's just can't even tell you the kind of the style rules about how you refer to. Does a PhD get to be a doctor? Is that only medical doctor? This kind of thing. And so once they switched the whole style guide over, to anti-abortion, I think it was about a decade ago, which is of course interesting, I guess, because I hadn't thought about it like this till right now. But that's the time period of our book, the last 10 years, which is the last decade, as we talk about it, of the Roe era in American life. And so I, it's, as you've been talking, the movement, started so long ago, right? The legal aspects of this, the kind of entire cultural, political landscape of this has been playing out, slowly over all of these years, and it's just added up to, such lasting change. But one of the big successes of the anti-abortion or pro-life movement, has been their ability to think in generational terms. This is something the left really, really missed. I think they were more caught up in kind of small electoral cycles, but this is, a long movement that has, roots, well beyond. I mean, well beyond, the last 50 years. Going back to those time periods you're referring to. Before the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. And so the changes, in this time period, it reflects that those deep religious, spiritual, moral, as well as, of course, political kind of questions even about what kind of country does America want to be. And so this is just the book, The Fall of Roe, really looks at what happened in this final decade and how was it that a movement that had been trying for so long, kind of in some cases under the radar, in some cases quite publicly, been working for these changes.
So I'm going to come back with Elizabeth after the break. The book is The Fall of Roe. I'm going to talk to her during the break, and then after the break, and I'm going to play all of the interview, put it all on the podcast today, because she's going to stay with me for at least an hour, because it takes that long. You can't rush a conversation about abortion. I very rarely discuss it on the air, and I'm always very, very aware that a lot of people are listening have both had abortions or had babies that they were not expecting, and we will continue the conversation in that tone. Stay tuned. I am back now with Elizabeth, because Elizabeth is going to stay with me for an hour. Elizabeth Diaz is one of the co-authors, along with Lisa Lair, of The Fall of Roe, this book. Elizabeth, did you talk to Alan Sears for this book?
A lot of people in the book are. We didn't talk to Alan. I don't for this project, but we don't actually talk a lot about the range of people who did speak to us on background or off the record. So only talk about kind of the on the record conversations. We spoke to more than 350 people for this book, plus others, that I met covering the March for Life in all these different states. And
well, I want to be very open with
Yeah.
you. I am
Yeah.
not part of Alliance Defending Freedom, but I have spoken to the Blackstone Fellows for 20 of the 24 years past. Alan is a friend. I've known him forever. He's the founder of the Alliance Defending Freedom.
A lot of important young up and coming lawyers through the Blackstone program for sure.
The Blackstone program is without any kind of equal in the United States. But I was just wondering if ADF talked to you on the record, or if you just dealt with their public affairs.
Oh, no, ADF spoke with us in many interviews on the record over the course of many months for this project. And I've spoken with them many times over the years too for my work. But they were so involved in how this decision came to be, from the legislation that was passed in states like Mississippi. People might not be aware. They actually have a big legislative project.
They are. This show knows, because ADF is on a lot.
Knows.
They often
I love it.
I raise money for them. Jonathan Birch is on a lot. You interviewed Jonathan Birch a lot about the Mississippi case, and he's on the record with you. They know all about ADF. We don't have to explain ADF to them.
Great.
But
I'm curious. I was on MSNBC a lot the other day.
Yeah, I know. I saw that. And they, of course, may be a little bit clueless about. Although I am a former host on MSNBC, I like to tell people the lowest rated host in the history of MSNBC. But I was a host there for a long time. Let me talk about Roe. You talk about Roe, which came down in 1973. But Roe was gutted by Casey in 1992. Why do you suspect we still talk about Roe as opposed to Casey, which needed to be overturned, not Roe?
Yeah, I love that question. There's something about Roe that just looms so large in kind of the American psyche and kind of the consciousness of these big symbols of what it means to be American, what it means to be a woman in America. It's a case that, as you say, it's just defined by a single word, Roe. You don't have to really explain Roe to people. They just know it. And it was such a turning point for these ideals, questions, sense of meaning and opportunity for being a woman in America. And that's really, so I love that you pointed out 1992, because that's the moment where we actually start so much in our book with the conservative women who were young. They were in their 20s, women like Marjorie Dannenfelser, Kellyanne Conway. Casey came down, and that's the year, that was right at the time when it was the quote, year of the woman for Democrats in Washington. Hillary Clinton came as First Lady, Ruth Bader Ginsburg soon came to the court. A lot of Democratic senators and women came into Washington, but there was this other crowd. There were these, at the time, young, conservative, often Christian women
And stand by, Elizabeth. We got to come back on the air, so stand by.
The Hugh Hewitt Show on the Salem Radio Network returns from break in 15 seconds. The Hugh Hewitt Show returns from break in 5 seconds.
I am back on the Hugh Hewitt Show with Elizabeth Diaz, co-author of The Fall of Roe, which I'm holding here. I read it in a 3-day sprint since it arrived with Lisa Lair. And Elizabeth is going to stay with me for another 45 minutes, so don't go anywhere or listen to the entire podcast. I'll broadcast the rest of this tomorrow and next week. Elizabeth, when I teach the cases, and when I say that, you can literally teach 40 cases if you want on abortion law, but I make sure they know Roe, Webster, Hodgson, Casey, Stenberg, Gonzalez, Whole Women's Health, and Dobbs. Dobbs has just been added. I don't believe you discussed in the book either Stenberg v. Carhart or Gonzalez v. Carhart. Did you?
You're making me. We didn't. One of the things about the book is that we were really focused on kind of the cultural, political aspects of this. There's been so much, as you said, written about the legal aspects of all of this, which could be books on books on books themselves. And I'm the religion reporter for the New York Times. My co-author Lisa is the national political correspondent. And we were really interested in what was this last decade like? Like, how did this suddenly start to change? And what were the cultural and political turning points?
Well, that's why, Carhart and Stenberg.
Yeah.
Stenberg v. Carhart and Gonzalez v. Carhart, I want to explain to the audience, they are the turning point because in Dobbs, not Dobbs, but in the 1992 decision, Casey versus Planned Parenthood or Planned Parenthood versus Casey, a 3-judge joint opinion issued between Anthony Kennedy, David Souter, and Justice O'Connor, 3 Republican appointees to the court, where they gutted Roe, tossed Roe away, threw out the Harry Blackmun nonsense, and it was a terrible decision, and everyone kind of recognized that. And they said, here's the deal going forward. Pre-viability, you may not restrict abortion. Post-viability states you can do whatever you want, provided that there's an exception for the life of the woman. That was the deal that those 3 struck with the liberals on the court in 1992. Along comes Stenberg v. Carhart in 2000, and late-term abortion has been outlawed by Nebraska. And by late term, I mean right up to the moment of birth. And Nebraska outlawed that practice. And the Supreme Court vetoed, declared the Nebraska law unconstitutional, and that broke the court. Justice O'Connor went with the majority. Justice Kennedy wrote the dissent, and he was angry because it broke the deal from 1992. And he wrote a very blistering dissent explaining that this was completely a reversal of what had been agreed in 92. So Roe overturned all the state laws. Casey overturned Roe. And then Stenberg overturned Casey. And then in Gonzalez, after Justice O'Connor had retired and had been replaced, the partial birth abortion bill passed by the Congress was what upheld. But the whole realignment on the court goes to the Carhart and Stenberg decisions. And I don't think you covered that, Elizabeth, unless I missed it. Do you think I missed it?
We didn't cover that part of it. We did talk about partial birth, 2006, and the impact of Casey. I was wanting to say that the conservative women who came to Washington after 1992 in that decision, their entire purpose was they did not want this vision of liberal womanhood that was being put up, after Casey, and with all of these liberal women trying to take the leadership in the conversation about abortion. So they really worked for 30 years to try to change that, and really rose after the partial birth abortion decision. They really tried to start to get different kinds of senators elected to be able to then, once there was opportunities for new justices to come in. I mean, this is after Alito came to the court right around that time. But they saw, that wasn't just going to be enough. They needed to be able to have all of the positions in place so that when there was an opportunity, when a case actually would get to the court, they would be able to have a different kind of ruling and continue to chip away at the foundation that Roe and then all these other cases that
Well, I
the
do
domino
think the
effect
one
kind
thing,
of that.
the one objection I'll make to the book that I want the radio audience to hear, and we'll continue the conversation after the break and we go to the extended uninterrupted conversation, is that you note Catholics are pro-life, a lot of evangelicals are pro-life, but there are a bunch of people who are both Catholic or evangelical, but also originalists like me, who simply believe this was a constitutional aberration that had to get away for the reason that Justice Scalia put in the Hill case, that it was distorting all of law. It was terrible constitutional law, and that it's fine now that the states can decide, and that the number of abortions in 2023 are going to be more than they were before Dobbs in the United States. Are you surprised by that,
They
Elizabeth?
are. There's been a lot of things I've been surprised by in the aftermath of all this, but I think you're right. Like a lot of this was has been unexpected, and the foundation of the law. I mean, we talk about this a lot of the book about the reasons that the conservatives and lawyers, but they had real reasons. And it wasn't that there's a lot of talk. Oh, did they like just go against democratic principles and do this? But actually, they used the existing system to refine the law the way that they see needed to happen.
And you're talking with someone who got out of law school in 1983 and has never not thought that Roe and Casey was all nonsense. All right, Casey hadn't come along when I got out of law school, but it was all nonsense and made up. We'll talk about that after the break. Elizabeth is sticking around with me for at least another 33 minutes, and I hope as long as it takes. I've got 10 pages of notes, Elizabeth, so goodness gracious, time here. Don't go anywhere, America, except over to highly concentrated you, and I'll play more of this tomorrow. Celebrate the veterans of D-Day who are still alive in Normandy today, and then come back and join me tomorrow. So I'm back now with Elizabeth. And Elizabeth, no more annoying breaks. It's very hard to do a serious conversation with annoying breaks. That's why I do it this way. Let's talk about.
Okay, moms around the country understand that.
Yeah,
It's all you gotta just do what you can.
I often have guests on, and I tell them, never worry if you have small children wander in. Whenever my grandchild visits the studio, she wanders in and sits down, even though there's a do not enter sign, and she knows better. She colors there she just wants to aggressively interrupt me, passive aggressively interrupt me. So let's talk about public opinion and abortion.
Yeah.
I know you talk about it quite a lot, so I went and looked up everything. And it turns out American public opinion really hasn't changed much. Very
Right.
few people want unlimited abortion. Very few people want no abortion. More than 60% oppose taxpayer funding of abortion, but it clearly had an impact on elections. Do you
Right.
think, why don't you represent what you believe public opinion to think about abortion in America today after spending a couple of years working on this book?
Right. You're totally right. Public opinion. It's one of the most interesting things I think learning throughout writing this book is that the anti-abortion pro-life movement worked so hard for so long to try to change public opinion. Right. This isn't just about. I mean, it is and it isn't. Right. Just about the fact of the cases and ending Roe. Right. This is about ending abortion in America. Right. I mean, this is a movement that really understands the deep, they see this as the biggest civil rights, the biggest moral battle of the modern age, and so that is a challenge that they still have now, and I think that's one of the things that's been surprising is that I talked to so many people who really believed that Dobbs came about because America changed its mind on this, and the backlash. Oh my gosh, you guys probably know that all your listeners know this quite intimately, but the backlash to the Dobbs decision has really been kind of unlike anything that I think anyone expected.
Elizabeth, I kind of
On the
think
right or
that's
the left.
overstated. In fact, I'm very
Yeah.
firmly
Okay.
in the camp that that's overstated because in the 2022 election, Florida, which has a very restrictive abortion regime, went deep red. Ron DeSantis won overwhelming reelection. In Ohio, the same thing happened. There wasn't a red wave. There were a lot of
Oh,
red
right. I'm not talking.
thunderstorms.
Yeah, I'm not talking necessarily. Well, and it's really important to point out that the whole landscape is different because, as you're saying, that what happens in each of the states matters so much now, right? It's not just about the national conversation. You can be winning and losing at the same time.
Exactly.
But the different, right, and that's something that's it's you have to get into these nuances. So it doesn't make any sense. But the challenge is that um, when when the left is putting all these ballot measures, right, and putting the question of abortion and what voters want directly to the people, it's passing, and the Roe standard is getting reinstated in these places. Even red places like Kansas. I mean, this is like and I understand Kansas has a very different history with which a very specific history with Wichita, the history of the abortion doctor Tiller and his murder there. So there's like a whole other kind of thing going on there. But that split of like what elected power is and what the power of the people is something that I think both movements on the right and the left are having to grapple with for the first time. It just means the politics has totally changed. So you can't
It
quite
has, because it's back in
operate
the
in the
states.
same way. Right.
Because the Constitution is back in force as it was intended to be in the states or in the driver's seat. And I think Donald Trump has the right answer. I agree with the president's answer, which this is should not be a national issue because we are a federal system and the police power, which regulates abortion, resides with the states. Now, it is possible that there could be a national statute. Why do you suppose, if the Democrats were really that interested in this, they passed by the opportunity in Joe Biden's first year or second year to use reconciliation to impose upon the nation a abortion standard? I have my answer, but I want to know what you think.
Yeah.
Why did they pass that by?
Well, I want to say they didn't just pass it by then, right? They actually passed a lot by that they could have been doing to advance their cause for decades. And we talk about some of those missed opportunities for them, or really what a lot of people within their own movement are now talking about as failures. Even Hillary Clinton told us, like, why was her own party doing nothing about this, right, for their own cause? And there was this big prevailing sense, really, of just denial and not seeing that there was another part of the country that really had such a different, not just vision, right, for the law and for everything, but sense of values and kind of what they really wanted the soul of America to be. So, I mean, there was a lot of failure going on the left, and I think that's something that they have to reckon with now,
Well, it's
right?
interesting, Elizabeth. I read that portion of your book and I said,
Yeah.
I wish she had talked to me because it wasn't a failure on the left. It was a
Okay.
strategic choice. They wanted
I
the
wish I
issue.
talked to you too, Hugh.
They wanted the issue. They did not want the victory. They wanted the issue. And when Dobbs came down, there are not a few Democrats who don't care about abortion, but we're very glad to have the issue because they're in the business of winning elections in purple states and in states where abortion might be more salient as an issue. They wanted the Ohio initiative. They wanted an initiative in Michigan this year. They wanted the issue. They could have had the win. But the real problem, I'd like you to speak to this, is that if Democrats put forward an abortion bill, let's say Joe Biden wins again, they get back to the House and they keep the Senate, they could restore abortion rights nationally, but then they would have to decide what to do with late-term abortion. And because you did the research, late-term abortion is very wildly unpopular in the United States. People think it's infanticide. There is a life of the mother exception always. I've never met anyone who doesn't agree with the life of the mother exception. So no one is really fully anti-abortion. But did you run into that? Did you run into anyone who actually candidly told you, we could have had this, but we didn't want it. We wanted the issue?
It didn't come quite across like that, but the challenge is like, how are they going to get to 60, right? I think it's important to talk about this as a long game issue, right? This isn't just one cycle, right? And that's how the right was so successful. They were able to map that out over decades in a way that the left didn't. But I do think now it's sort of the first time.
But
that
Elizabeth, they didn't need to get to 60. They could have used
well,
reconciliation in 2021 or reconciliation in 2022, which is
maybe I think the politics were probably pretty tough to be able to do that then. And also 2021 and 2022 is before that spell of denial was broken, right? They didn't see the risk but they didn't see kind of why they needed to do it, right? They just believed Roe was secure. It was a total, like, coming from left field, the
Well, then wouldn't
successful
they be stupid?
push.
Because after you get Justice
I'll let you
Gorsuch,
kind of,
after you get Justice Kavanaugh, and after you get
you
Justice
know,
Barrett on the
I,
court, aren't you stupid not to see that?
I mean, my job is to just point out what happened. You can talk about what you make of that, but I do know everyone's now kind of, there's a lot of regret about not knowing and not understanding, like, the reality of the way the
Oh,
country was
Elizabeth,
changing
do
around
you
us.
really? I mean, crocodile tears here for me. They knew what was coming. The people. The one thing I would fault the book for not doing, you
Yeah.
can't do everything in a book. So it's like a radio show. People say, why didn't you ask this or that? And I said, well, you do the show sometime. So I didn't write your book. But I do think when you look at all the Republicans who got appointed, that ended up on the court, Blackmun, O'Connor, Kennedy, Souter, all very nice people. They tried to do their job. But none of them, at least Souter especially, didn't tell George H.W. Bush what he really thought about abortion. Because if he had, George H.W. Bush would have said, Edith Jones, come in from door number 2, where she was in the other room. He made up his mind based on John Sununu and Warren Rudman, and Rudman winning and Sununu losing. And do you think Souter was dishonest with the president for not everyone knew this was the abortion pick. It was the big deal. And Souter simply was pro-choice, and he didn't tell the president that.
Well, this was the whole. I mean, you're right. Everybody, all of the nominees. There was a way to answer the questions about abortion, and the way was to not talk about it and to say, we have precedent. Precedent is the law of the land. I'll respect precedent. I think everyone on both parties, and certainly for the American public who is not following this largely as closely, like some of the, at least the kind of the voters that I talked to, which wasn't back in the time of Souter, but when I talked to them, out canvassing, really following Susan B. Anthony list at the Susan B. Anthony Pro-Life America now, when they were out canvassing outside of Indianapolis for Kavanaugh, and there was sort of, and they were targeting voters who were really aware, right, and who actually did understand what the implications of someone like Kavanaugh would be potentially for abortion, right? But a lot of voters, people didn't quite see that, and they answer it over and over again as I'll respect precedent. I think now, and it'll be interesting, right, when we have the first hearing for a justice after Roe was fallen. We had, of course, Justice Jackson, who her confirmation was just slightly, I think, right before the Dobbs decision itself, but. Again, the answer, as you said, is like, I will respect precedent. But what everyone knows now that wasn't kind of deep in the consciousness is just how deeply precedent can change. So
okay, this is a question
really
again. I wish I'd had the index, because I don't know if you brought up the Citizens United decision and the concurrence in Citizens United by the Chief Justice. Did you? Are you familiar with this?
Yeah, with the way that all the money and the funding was able to change.
Right. But what the Chief Justice did was he put down in a concurrence, here's when stare decisis does not bind. And he listed all the factors. And it was a playbook for Alito, by the way. Justice Alito basically ran through the Roberts factors for when you overturn a decision. And I thought to myself, there's a real downside to great reporters who aren't lawyers writing books about the law. And that's
I'll
because.
also say, Hugh, I think there's a great downside to great reporters about the law who don't understand religion, being able to talk about this. Because I
True.
talk to people.
I've been a
Yeah,
religion
yeah.
reporter. I bet you
Well,
since
that's
you were in
why I
primary
love
school.
talking with you. I know. I love talking with you. You're the exception to this. That's why it's so wonderful to be able to have this conversation. These, like you're saying, these kinds of conversations are pretty rare, I think. And I think they're hopefully happening a little bit more after the country has changed so much, kind of forces conversations that didn't happen before.
Let me ask you, did you believe Christine Blasey Ford?
I didn't cover it directly, so I try to only stick to areas that I cover, and you're on the opinion side of it. I'm on the reporting side, so it's never really about.
I'm on both sides. I've done both.
Yeah,
and
yeah. I've only done the news side, so I can really only speak to
And I know
what
what I know
happened.
based on being part of the Washington Post, being part of
Yeah.
PBS, being part of Salem. I have never met in a legacy media outlet, not once, a reporter who was pro life. Have you?
Um, I have, I have, but that's, um, you know, and I'll say I went to Wheaton College. It's an evangelical school. I'm sure all your listeners know. Maybe people have gone.
It's the
I
Harvard of Christian colleges. Everyone on this
Thank
show
you.
knows that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You got that. That will also kind of make me blush. And then I
And
went to
Princeton
Princeton,
Theological Seminary. I want to
Princeton
add that.
Theological Seminary. Yeah, and I think, it all kind of. Um, I know a lot of people who really think very deeply and in broad ways, kind of about the complexities of issues. And I think it's difficult, right? This environment of having to simplify kind of things so much.
Well, Elizabeth, my
You're
problem,
reductionistic.
and
Yeah.
I'm not speaking about the New York Times because I never ask anyone to comment on their own employer. So do not take this as a question about
Yeah.
the Times. My problem with legacy media, and I've never worked for the Times, so I don't know anything about the Times, but I know about NBC, I know about MSNBC, I know about the Post, is that when I did the debate with NBC this past time around, we probably had 50 people involved in debate prep. I believe I was the only person who had voted for Donald Trump twice, and I believe I was the only person who was pro-life. And I know I was the only person who objected to abortion questions more than one. And I know when I brought up late-term abortion, everyone thought it was a marginal issue when in fact it's not. It's 1% of the 900,000 abortions that occur annually in the United States. But I wasn't surprised because the media, legacy media, attracts smart, accomplished graduates like you who want to go to work for institutions that matter. But those institutions have just forgotten the center right. And then you cover religion. I'm sure you've heard from people of faith that they feel ill used by legacy media. I'm sure you've heard that repeatedly,
Hmm.
correct?
Yeah, I hear some of that. I also hear the gratitude when I interview people about for my coverage and coverage of a lot of my colleagues out in the country, talking to everyday Americans, right? I hear a gratitude for having their story heard. I mean, I'm thinking right now of a woman, a young gal, worked at a Baptist church in Eastern Tennessee, ran a pregnancy center out of the basement of the church. I went to see her. She was nervous about, it's big New York Times coming. And I just sat with her in the clinic there in the center for several days, speaking with the women, hearing about the challenges that they face. I mean, and it was so powerful because we're able to say in the story, like these are women that she can offer a place to shower, right? Like figure out how to find a job, figure out so many of them wanted to be able to have kids. It was an economic challenge, right? It was not kind of the cookie cutter story that's so used to hearing, and we put it on the front page, and it really was impactful for that community, and being able to do those kinds of stories has been so important to me. It's why the book opens actually in a center very similar in the outskirts of Cincinnati at the moment that Roe fell, right? I was with women as they're praying in the chapel. These were Catholic ladies who devoted their lives to helping women, who were similar to the ones that I met out in
That is
Eastern
where the book
Tennessee.
opened. But I'm
Yeah.
curious about omissions and whether or not they're conscious. I don't have the index again. Did you talk about Senator Dianne Feinstein's questioning and statements about Amy Coney Barrett in the book? Because I don't think you did, but if you did and I missed it,
We
I don't want to.
we talked about people of praise. Is that what you
Yeah,
mean?
I'm going to
In
come
the
to
first
people of praise,
confirmation,
but
the first when they were asking about what did her what was it exactly? It was about, did her Catholicism obscure? Was she biased because she was Catholic? That questioning in her first when she
yeah, Senator
was
Dianne
appeal
Feinstein's
court.
quote, which really was unconstitutional to utter, much less base a vote upon, was the dogma lives deeply. That's a direct quote. Senator
Yeah,
Feinstein
we do
said.
talk about that. No, we do talk about that because
That did you note that
um,
it's a violation of Article 6 of the Constitution to impose a
well,
religious test? on people?
Well, we talked about the implication of like what it would mean to say that, right? And because so much of the story is in the book is like this, it's about this. Yes, it's about Roe, but it's about this bigger conflict playing out right now between religion and its place in the public square as America becomes more secular and like doesn't understand or value in the same way that it may have in the past, like the deeply held religious values of so many people who can also be in positions of power. And what was so interesting to me about that moment was it became kind of a moment of pride in a good way, right? For so many of the conservatives that I spoke to, they emblazoned the phrase, maybe you have one on mugs, right? And t-shirts, like the dogma was loudly within you. It became kind of a sense of pride of like, but look, we were able to get her on the court anyway, and she's able to represent positions, of that so many Americans in their America, right, in their
Well, it
world.
was an outrage by a senator who was mentally not all there. I'm not really sure if she was aware of what she was saying, but it was an outrage because it's unconstitutional to impose a religious test on people. The framers saw to that, and let me go to page 129, where you issue one of your very few conclusions are here from you guys, but you will relay to us what Secretary Clinton has been a guest on this show, and we had a great conversation. But she told you she would have expanded Obama's liberal vision into a new era, one where abortion rights were not just protected, but expanded. How in the world could they have been expanded from where they were?
Well, if you imagine that she was, think of how different the world would have been if she had been president instead of President Trump, right?
That would have been
It's
a
such a
disaster. We'd have lost the Constitution for 100 years.
Well, imagine if she had gotten 3 Supreme Court justices.
Right. I mean, it would have been the end of the Constitution as we know it.
Then the kinds of cases that would have come up would have been very different. We would not have come to Dobbs.
But you couldn't expand abortion. What I'm getting at, Elizabeth, is you said she told you that she would expand abortion access. I don't know how you could have expanded it during the era of Casey.
We had a very interesting interview with her, and she said, maybe you also saw this in the Times when we published the full interview, but she basically said, that her, that she kind of saw a lot of this coming, and no one else was listening to her, and she didn't. We were asking, kind of who's at fault for this on the Democratic side, and she didn't see her. I mean, she had people to blame. She called the Supreme Court justices liars. So it's her word, not my word. And that she didn't talk about kind of what, if any, her own culpability might be in any of this. So it was such the world that would have been created that would have been so different. And think about the kind of administration that she would have had, right? One of the things that former President Trump's administration was so successful at that no one gave them credit for, especially at the beginning, was the way that anti-abortion, pro-life folks were able to, they really leaned in and filled so many positions in the deep in kind of the
let's go there. Let's go there because I found that a very interesting. Yeah. Matt Bowman's a friend of mine, by the way, and and Matt is mentioned in passing in this book. I don't think fairly, Elizabeth. You say he was arrested often and went to HHS. Matt also graduated summa cum laude from Ave Maria after his pro-life demonstrations and finished first in his class and clerked for Alito and another judge. Matt is a brilliant lawyer.
A very influential person, which is why it was important that he was.
And I kind of made a mark saying, if I were writing this, I would have said, yes, he was a very committed protester at abortion clinics, and that had some run-ins with the law, but boy, is he a smart lawyer. But then this is my biggest objection to the book. Okay. You say on page 121, Democrats were enraged by the McConnell blockade. The list that Trump put out marked another Democratic norm being shattered by a man whose candidacy seemed to break every unwritten rule of politics in Washington. Now, first of all, Ted Kennedy standing up and accusing Robert Bork of taking us back to the day of hangers and back alleys was outrageous. The Reid rule, though, Harry Reid broke the filibuster. Harry Reid did that, not Mitch McConnell. He did that. That was the breaking of the norm. But you don't mention that, or that in 1968, Abe Fortas was attempted to be confirmed as Chief Justice, but was shot down in an election year. They had a vote, and Mitch McConnell deciding not to confirm anybody is consistent with 150 years of Supreme Court tradition that was only broken in 2020 when Republicans pushed through Amy Coney Barrett in 45 days. And that there is no actually precedent for that, but I expect Democrats would do the same. What about that? Why not include the Republican view of the McConnell decision, which I applauded on the day he made it? No hearings, no votes, had nothing to do with Merrick Garland. Put that issue before the American people. Why not fairly reflect our point of view?
Yeah, I think we do actually talk about why that was so significant for Republicans that moment. I mean, and being able to do, it was actually something that was different, and everyone knew the huge consequences of that. As far as those really much the older decisions you're referencing, I love a book. One, I mean, I feel like you could write an encyclopedia, basically, like so many books. Like part of what we were trying to do with this project is make kind of a lot of complicated legal decisions and politics and things. I mean, we're really thinking about a lot of kind of cul-de-sac conversations, we kind of call them, about how do you point, sort of show the main arc of the trends, right? Because as you're saying, by the time you get to Amy Coney Barrett's confirmation, right, what you do see is kind of how these things all build together, and it ends.
Yeah, I would have included the Reid rule, his decision to break the filibuster in an unprecedented fashion without precedent in the Senate history. Because after that, all bets were off. After Reid broke the rule, all bets were off. They took away supermajority requirement for Supreme Court justice, and all bets were off. Let me ask you about Chapter 16. You brought it up. It's titled Stacking the Administration. All right, we're going to play quiz time again. Do you know how many federal civil servants there are, not counting the uniformed military?
I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds
2
of thousands.
million.
2 million.
2 million. Do you know how many political appointees?
I have to say, in my defense, I have to say there's a reason that I didn't study math.
Well, 2 million is a lot of people. Do you know how many appointments the president gets?
Yeah, well, we weren't only just talking, not 2 billion. I know.
No, he gets 3,000.
Yeah,
so you can't stack it. I'm just curious. What do you think? What do you think Democrats thought Donald Trump was going to do after he put out the list? He's going to put pro-life people at HHS. He's going to appoint pro-life judges, and he's going to nominate pro-lifers. It's not like a surprise.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it was like a shock that this happened. I'm saying it was very successful because you're saying, like, even people like your friend Matt Bowman, these are really smart people who people go into positions where it's not like they have like total authority to change everything about American abortion law, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about change that can happen in these kind of small but really pivotal ways that can end up changing a culture, right? Like, and I actually, to your point about didn't Democrats know, based on all of our interviews, I'm not really sure like that anyone was paying attention to that, right? That specific part of it.
Okay, now Elizabeth,
it's
my best friend in the world was Bill
happen.
Clinton's communications director.
Yeah.
My college roommate Mark Guerin, and the other college roommate was Barack Obama's deputy secretary of energy. Every Democrat in America knew that abortion was on the ballot. Every single person knew that the Supreme Court was at issue. If Democrats failed to persuade, it's because when people talk about the Supreme Court, they don't just think about abortion. They think about the NRA and the Second Amendment. They think about the states' rights involved in the 10th Amendment. People vote on the court for a lot of reasons beyond abortion, although some certainly do. And everyone who votes on abortion doesn't do so because they're Catholic or evangelical. I tried to call Tim Sandifer yesterday. I don't know if you know Tim. Brilliant leader of litigation at the Goldwater Institute. Atheist. Just absolute atheist, libertarian. I'm pretty sure, but I couldn't confirm it, so I don't want to misspeak. I know, I have to say with commit, Tim Sandifer thought Casey was horrible law. There are a lot of people in America who are not religious who thought Casey was a terrible decision. Does that come through in your book at all?
I there certainly there are. I mean, yes, we talk about former the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We include her thoughts about Roe, right? Didn't she said very clearly she didn't think that Roe, she wanted that kind of outcome, but she didn't want it to be that kind of law, right? I mean, she didn't want it to be like that. There were other cases she wished had done this instead. And so but that's also a reason why the kind of the questions of how do you actually get to a point where you can change that, and what is the effect of that culturally. A lot of it was really interesting. It was a lot of women who were big leaders, and still are big leaders in the pro-life, anti-abortion movement.
Now let me talk about the size of that movement, Elizabeth,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
you indicate on page 201, Alliance Defending Freedom work was growing, largely under the radar. I disagree with that because it's been as public as
You were
public can
paying.
be.
I think you and a lot of your listeners were paying close attention in a way that a lot of other people and people on the left. I say I still actually talk to important folks on the left who are not familiar with their work. I think that's
That might be the case, but that's not
they're
under
so
the radar.
successful.
Under the radar suggests subterfuge or camouflage. ADF is about the most public, and the lawyer network. It's enormous. I'm not a member of ADF. I go and speak to their gatherings when they have 4,000 lawyers come in to be trained on how to provide religious liberty protections and freedom of conscience protections. I don't think it was fair to describe them as being anti-transgendered. They are actually pro making sure that girls' sports are for girls and boys' sports are for boys, and they litigate that. But mostly I want to talk about the relative size of the left's network and the right's network. Do you know the budget of the ACLU in 2020? Got a guess?
Oh, in 2020, it was very big. I'm now going to just do general math terms for you.
All right, $171 million. Meanwhile, yesterday, Josh Dawsey, a colleague of mine at the Washington Post, reposted something that CBS reported. Arabella is a dark money juggernaut. Through its constellation of nonprofits, it brought in close to $3 billion in dark money in the 2022 cycle. The behemoth in the Arabella network, the 1630 Fund, raised nearly $380 million in that same cycle. What do you think about the relative funding of the left versus the right in America? This is an objective question, not
Well,
a guess.
you're right. No. I mean, think about even Leonard Leo's, the big $1 billion effort, that the donation, and then effort that's funding for that sort of vision. It's smaller than those numbers you mentioned, and I think and what we really point out in the book, this is again part of the really big success story of the right, and on this issue.
Yeah, there's David, and Goliath is the left,
yeah.
because the left has
That's right.
money coming out of the ears, but they haven't got the Constitution. Well, let's talk about Leonard. And full disclosure, I met him once. I had one conversation with him in 2004. In fact, I know him so little that when I was a guest of a senator for lunch in the Senate dining room, he was sitting with another senator. I said, "Who's that sitting with Senator X?" He said, "You don't know Leonard?" No, don't know. I know about Leonard, but I'm not a member of the Federalist Society. I don't belong to any groups. I don't want to be associated with anybody. I go to talk to anyone. But honestly, Leonard's a hero. He's just doing what George Soros is doing with a third of the budget in 2022. A third of the budget. Isn't that remarkable?
It is. I mean, it is remarkable to look and to see that, and to see it's making a huge influence in American society, and it's a reason actually we wrote this book, because the story of kind of what I'm going to say under the radar, or smaller, or kind of not the mainstream, right?
What you should say is liberals don't pay attention.
Well,
the left ignores their adversaries. They are overconfident, as Secretary Clinton suggested. They are always surprised when the great silent majority speaks.
Well, it's a reason we wrote this book, to be able to get into and to show, I had the privilege of being able to report about this and spending so much time with leaders on the right and in the pro-life, anti-abortion movement for so many years, and to be able to outline their strategies on how they were able to accomplish this major feat, that completely changed. It's still changing America, right? Like this is
Well,
very
there are a few
different.
things, Elizabeth. I'll put them all out there. You can deal with them. I made a list of my objections. Referring to people of praise as, quote,
Did you make
and
a list? Did you
I
make
did.
a list of any
I
other
got 10
things you
pages of
like?
notes. We could actually talk for 10 hours, but we're not going to. I want to
I
make
know.
sure that
Well,
I'm.
we get offline.
What I want to ask you about is people of praise, page 216, an especially insular religious community. All right, that's a description. It's a
Yeah.
negative description. Is Opus Dei
Oh,
an
I'm not sure
insular
it was
religious
negative.
community? Because I don't think people of praise is insular at all because they allow
Oh, I
anyone to
didn't.
join who wants to.
Yeah. Oh, I think. I mean, I'm sorry. I didn't. I don't know that I meant that necessarily in a negative way. It's more the way, the kind of the way that community is so tightly knit, right? It's like some of these. It's the way that kind of day to day life is, and it is quite small. I think it's that one. It's under a couple thousand or several thousand members. I think it is. It's pretty small. It's not like I was
Small
trying
and
to make
dedicated would have
think
been
that.
fine,
Well,
but
there's
insular
a fear.
suggests that
Oh,
they're defensive and they're in a crouch, and they're not. They're just
well,
very rigorous Catholics.
yeah, rigorous Catholics. I mean, part of it is trying to make sure that we can show kind of the range of different Catholic views, right? And you mentioned Opus Dei. Like one of the things about Opus Dei is they really rely on the work of lay people to advance kind of the values of the church and for societal influence, right? And it is, I guess you might be able to describe that as I don't remember exactly what word you used for that, but it's not something
Rigorous.
where they like public.
It's
What is it?
rigorous, but they're
Rigorous.
open
Yes.
to anyone.
Rigorous.
Again,
They are, but they also
I've
don't.
never been to the Catholic
Yeah.
Information Center. It's not my deal, but
Yeah, but they
I
also
thought
don't
maybe you
share their
guys
membership. Yeah, but
were
they don't share
sneaking
their
in.
membership. You know, they don't share publicly. Like you don't say like, "Oh, I'm a member." Right? That is something they keep private.
But they answer. No,
But
no, actually, if you talk to
well,
Arthur
I've
Brooks,
asked.
for example, Arthur
Yeah,
will tell
yeah,
you his kids went to Friends. He's a member of
yeah.
Opus Dei. I've never met a
But
shy
some
Opus
people
Dei
do.
person, ever,
Oh, um,
ever, because
I would say
they want to
I
recruit
have, but I don't
Catholics.
tell. Yeah. Well, no, but part of it. I mean, I do think the Opus Dei network. It's really important to acknowledge all of the work that they did toward this end. And I don't, towards overturning Roe. There were so many
Oh,
lawyers.
wait, 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 wait. They didn't do
Bill
any
Barr.
work to overturn. They are absolutely apolitical, but they're very rigorous Catholics. And Bill Barr and Pat Cipollone, who you call Catholic power players, well, long before this, Bill Barr was the Attorney General of the United States a decade ago. I mean, 15 years ago,
Isn't
before he
he? So
became
he's
a
not a
quote.
power. I think he's the power broker. You don't think he's the
Yeah,
power broker?
but I think to refer to him as a Catholic power broker undermines the authority and credibility of maybe the most intellectually gifted Attorney General of since the country was founded. I
Oh, I
mean,
think.
Marshall was a
Yeah.
great Supreme Court justice, but he wasn't the Attorney General. The Attorney General's a different, discrete place, and Barr may be the smartest one ever. Have you read his memoir?
I mean, I'll put it out there. I think a lot of Democrats, that I talk to, kind of are the corollary to this. Like as I'm saying, like, oh, look at all the credit the right gets for all of the work that they have done. Is Democrats notice that too, right? And we talk about this. There's kind of a bemoaning now, and Hillary Clinton said the same thing. She's like, where is our Leonard Leo and our Federalist Society? Like, why we have nothing to match this. We don't have that kind of network in any capacity, right? Like they don't they
And
are
that's
looking at
just not
seeing what
true.
they're up against.
They've got
But
Arabella. They've got the ACL. It's just so
I mean,
astonishing to me. I know people make that claim. I'm not denying they make that claim to you. It's simply
well,
not
they
true.
haven't they weren't able to preserve Roe.
They
I'm just
weren't,
talking
because
about
it
what
was
ended
bad
up happening.
constitutional law
But
and
it's
presidential. It should have fallen in 1992. One of the things I want to make on the record is that
yeah.
again and again Republicans won. Ronald Reagan won twice. H.W. won once. W won twice. Trump won once. They got all sorts of Supreme Court appointments, and they could never overturn Roe because people lied to them in the confirmation process. Like, I don't know if Justice O'Connor lied, but certainly David Souter did. And or not lied. He was never asked, but knowingly withheld information of material consequence to H.W. Bush that affected this. And that's why 49 years went by, is because Republicans were not very good at this. I got to get to two things before you go. Two things that I object to. One,
Okay.
page 304. By this point, ADF lawyers had argued and won 12 Supreme Court cases dealing with questions of contraceptive access under Obamacare and anti-LGBT discrimination. I think those are very unfair characterizations of the Hobby Lobby case and the Masterpiece Cake Shop. Very, very unfair. They were arguing for religious liberty in Hobby Lobby. They are arguing for religious liberty in Masterpiece Cake Shop. And religious liberty, if you ask Americans, should we honor the free exercise clause, you'll get like 95% saying yes. And I hope Smith versus Employment Division gets tossed out. Do you think it's fair to say that they wanted to restrict contraceptive access, or did they want to defend Hobby Lobby? Are they anti-LGBTQ, or are they pro-women's sports?
Well, again, this is the reason that I think we write a whole book about something instead of just kind of one or two lines about something, because these are, and maybe there will be. I'm very interested in what happens with the Employment Division versus Smith case. Another case I think isn't getting enough attention about kind of the implications of that and where that may be going. But it's the impact, kind of the effect on cultural change, and the stated objective about. I mean, for the Alliance Defending Freedom, they have a clear statement of beliefs. It is a set of overtly Christian beliefs, right? It's like a statement of faith, kind of like the one at Wheaton College, or at kind of any evangelical church that I see and go to, and there is a certain set of values about marriage and women and family, and kind of the cultural goal about that for the future. And for ADF, we have some internal documents that we reported about from them that kind of outline their vision for excuse me, where they want to go in the future on some of these cases. And I think that's because they're so powerful, and because they have this sort of legislative to lawyers to courts to changing the culture pipeline set up. That's something that I hear some Democrats being quite concerned about. Right? They're like,
well, they are trying to persuade people. I try to persuade people every day. They have First Amendment rights. They make their arguments. They win a lot of lawsuits at the Supreme Court, and they did so even before Justice Barrett and Justice Kavanaugh arrived, when it was the old court with Gorsuch taking over for Justice Scalia. So it was the old court. I got to tell you, though, about Employment Division v. Smith. I've been criticizing that since I did my first law review article on Employment Division versus Smith.
Really?
It was written by Scalia, and the people who dissented in it were Brennan, Marshall, and Blackmun. The three liberals dissented in Employment Division, so I'm with the liberals. It's a terrible abridgment of free exercise right, and I hope I go on. But I want to get to one last thing, Elizabeth, a line you guys wrote. The court was the last sacred institution in American political life. And now, because of the power of Roe, it had become as broken as everything else. All right, we're going to spend a lot of time on this. First of all, What else is broken? Is the New York Times broken? Is NPR broken? Is the Washington Post broken?
Well, I mean, I think there we're talking about, and that's in the section kind of about government and how government works. I mean, you look at, especially kind of in the public perception of like the effectiveness of institutions like Congress and the White House, and then for the court, since this decision, look at like kind of the way that the court has devolved as a trusted. It had been until this like more highly rated in terms of trust from the American people. But I think like all of the media, like all of these institutions that you're adding into this mix, we're at a real crisis about institutional power and authority and trust in public consciousness. Right?
Well, that's my point.
Internet,
is that if
right?
you
Some of that is the internet, right? Just the way that
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's why I thought it was not particularly fair to say the Supreme Court has trust broken, because everything in the United States has trust broken. Everything, every organization, every branch of government, every elected official, because we have social media that funnels rage and
right. Well,
illuminates.
we talk a lot about social media. Yeah, we do. We talk about that, especially the kind of the way that social media came in. Think back. Oh gosh, when was it? It was when the 2013, like that the left and the right, like both trying to figure out how to use social media to their advantage. But the way that kind of like took off on this issue from there was the Wendy Davis when she did her stand down in Texas, right? Her filibuster. I mean, the folks over
Yeah,
at
I
Twitter
kind of
were like,
skip
"This is
read
the
that
best."
chapter. Wendy Davis did that whole stunt, and
Yeah,
I
but
thought you guys may
my
have.
point there is not about that. My point is about the effectiveness of Twitter with that, which the head of Twitter at the time was like praising, like what Twitter could do for her platform. But then the right came back and was able to use kind of the internet and social media to do those undercover Planned Parenthood investigations, right? Like the way
That's not
that
the
the
right.
public was
That is
able.
not the right.
Oh,
That is a
well,
one particular group that I do not have on the
oh,
show for a variety of reasons because I do not believe in ambushes. I just don't. But I,
oh,
I
oh,
do
but
think
my point is that this shattering. My point is more about this shattering, right? Like the way, like it used to be, you had to go through a certain system to do something, but now these things can just get on the internet, and it kind of spins out of control in a way that then shapes conversation and sort of that is part of the disintegration
Yeah,
of
one of my
how
favorite Dylan songs,
institutions
Elizabeth.
work.
Are you a Dylan fan?
Uh, I admittedly just went to the Taylor Swift concert in
Oh
Sweden,
gosh.
so
Well,
yeah.
okay, to your generation, Taylor Swift. Although my 12-year-old granddaughter is also a Swiftie, so it's more than it's everywhere. Bob Dylan, in his later career, wrote a song, "Everything Is Broken," and I think everything is broken, and we're just fine. The Supreme Court's just fine. It won't be fine if the filibuster is broken and Democrats expand the court, because then Republicans will expand the court. It'll just be the re-rule again. Here's where I want to close. I want to close with the fact that you note abortion remains legal in California in the quote New America. You say that on page 365. And I don't think you'll disagree with me. Any state in the union that wants to follow California's example is free to do so. There is no push anywhere for outlawing the life of the mother exception. There is no push anywhere to, I got to be careful, any mainstream push in the conservative
Okay, I
movement
was just gonna
to
say
say
mainstream.
that there's personhood in the baby at the moment of conception.
Oh,
Because
there is.
while
There's
that might
like
be a theological belief, it is not a
yeah.
legal belief that is anywhere.
Right, right. Actually, one of the things that's been quite interesting is the way the personhood movement has actually gained strength, especially in some state legislatures over since Roe was overturned. And these things, like again, we were talking earlier about generational change and kind of the long game here. But I definitely, we spoke to people who are on the what was considered at a time the more radical fringe, which was something about like personhood, like giving rights at conception, like rights um, to a fetus, to an embryo at conception, and that radical, like you can see over the course of our book how kind of the more radical edge crept in and was taking over
I
more
think you see that, but
mainstream
I don't see that because I think the
anti-abortion
personhood movement
movement.
remains very, very small, and it will never achieve
Oh, I'm not
political
saying.
significance.
Okay, I totally agree that it's small. I think the thing is, it does have an outsized power that it didn't have 10 years ago,
Nah,
right? Part of what we're
nah.
watching here. Well, I
This is
mean,
my world. This is my world. I know people who are dedicated personhood
it's
folks.
kind
I
of our
know
world
them.
too, Hugh.
No, but I mean, I go to the ADF conferences. I lead the ADF media seminar. You're more than welcome to come to it, by the way, Elizabeth, I'm
Oh,
sure.
thank you.
And nothing is secret. And some people have that view, and it's very, very few, even within Alliance Defending Freedom. Here's
Hmm.
where I want to end. This is an excellent polemic. I think it does not fairly represent my point of view or the point of view of conservatives who are constitutionalists and originalists, but that I could be wrong because I had to read it in 3 days. But I do, I do believe that it could have done more to be more inclusive of the whole round world of originalist point of view. Justice Alito is my hero. Leonard Leo is one of my heroes. These are people who fought by the rules. Mitch McConnell is my hero of heroes because he did what no one else wanted to do and said, no, we're going to play hardball here, like the Democrats do. So I want to give you the last word about my critique. Very good polemic, not particularly fair to my team.
It's interesting that you say that. I've feedback that I've gotten, and that some of the the reviews that I've seen come out have been that people actually don't know what we think, which I always find a credit to independent journalism, and that it's pretty even-handed. And I would say, um, I don't, can you name another book on this topic written by reporters like me that starts and centers a lot about it puts at the core, really listens to a lot of the voices of women who work in pregnancy centers and who have devoted their lives to this cause over the years. I think the book, I'll be really curious. I think these kinds of conversations, I so appreciate you having me on and being able to talk about this in, a non-aggressive way. I think like just understanding the history and understanding the story, kind of the facts of what happened, especially about this last decade, right? I didn't take on a 50-year history. We really took on this last 10 years because it's when America started really, that pace of change really accelerated, and kind of wanting to look at, what is the impact of the end of the Roe era in American life, and thinking about that. So it's really important that we included these voices, especially at this time, and to give due, frankly, really to the success, like whether you like it or not, like whether you agree with the outcome of overturning Roe, the right and the anti-abortion movement and lawyers and a lot of your friends, are enormously successful in ways that deserve to be put in American history, right? Like this, like understanding that strategy and that key influence is actually really critically important and needs to be part of how all Americans, no matter what they think about this issue, understand what's going on in this country and the real story of American history. So I really appreciate the conversation.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. I appreciate you taking so much time with me. Good luck on your book tour. Keep going to conservative sources, because I think it's a credit to you and to Liz, who also offered to come on. But the reason I didn't want two authors on, it's almost impossible to conduct a good interview with two authors.
Hard. Well, I appreciate. I really, the conservative world, that's really important to me and to my work, and I just so value when people, to trust me, and being able to have these kinds of open conversations is just so important for journalists.
Elizabeth, thank you. The book is The Fall of Roe, The Rise of a New America by Elizabeth Diaz and Lisa Lehrer, both of the New York Times. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Safe and good weekend to you.
Thank